She couldn't win a race to be mayor of Carbondale, but Democrats say she'll bring downstate voters to their ticket. Why did Governor Pat Quinn choose Sheila Simon as his running mate? That's next on Capitol View. Hi, I'm Amanda Vinicky, a fill-in host this week for Capitol View, normally a Statehouse reporter for Illinois Public Radio and WUIS. I'm joined this week by Kevin McDermott, the Statehouse bureau chief for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Thanks, Kevin.
Amanda. And
by Mike Riopell, who's with Lee Newspaper Group. They have papers, all over in Illinois, including in Decatur and the Bloomington Panagraph.
Hey, Amanda.
Thanks. Let's talk about Governor Pat Quinn. He kind of had a golden opportunity here to handpick his candidate for lieutenant governor after Chicago pawnbroker Scott Lee Cohen dropped out of the race after some indiscretions, or at least alleged ones, were made public. So he got to choose anyone he wanted, and the Democratic State Central Committee went along with him, chose Sheila Simon. Tell me about Sheila Simon. Was she a good pick, Kevin?
Well, I mean, first of all, you have to ask the question of whether this really was such a great thing to have to do. He was going to anger somebody, no matter who he picked. In this case, I think who he angered were probably a lot of African-American voters in Chicago who thought that Art Turner, state representative, who came in second in the lieutenant governor's race, should have been the pick. And you know, in terms of playground fairness, he probably should have been. They were looking at demographics. They've already got males from Chicago all over the ticket. They've already got racial diversity on the ticket. What they didn't have was a downstater, and you know, generally women are underrepresented on the slate. So you know, from that standpoint, she was a pretty good pick. She's got a golden name, certainly Paul Simon's daughter. But as you said in the opening, she could not win the mayor's race in Carbondale, and I'll tell you, I covered a little bit of that. And she's a very dynamic speaker. She's very good on the stump. But that was a poorly run campaign, and it's that simple. I mean, it was sort of a, you know, we have this coming kind of campaign, and people just didn't take well to it. Now, presumably she'll have better handlers on the state level, but we'll see. It's a fair question, though.
She even mentioned that in the meeting where she was chosen. You know, she didn't mention it totally directly, but said, you know, in my last campaign or something like that, she needed to be more aggressive. So, you know, whether or not she needs to be more aggressive this time, I think depends on how Quinn uses her in the campaign. You know, is she going to be the attack dog while he takes some other role? I mean, is she going to be primarily a fundraising person, or maybe they'll have to if she wasn't aggressive before, pick some other role for her to best suit her strengths in the campaign.
Yeah, and I think that, again, demographically, to have a downstater on there is valuable to be able to rebut the Bill Brady's campaign, which is going to say, you guys are all Chicago.
But is she a true downstater? I mean, yes, she's from Carbondale, obviously, and served on the city council there, but her values and political ideology seems very closely matched with Pat Quinn in terms of it is fairly liberal-leaning. Is she really resonating then as a true downstate candidate?
Well, that's where the Simon name comes into it. There was always sort of a quirky factor with Paul Simon, who had the same kinds of views, very progressive views, that the views themselves didn't play downstate, but they never stopped loving him down there. It was an odd enough thing that people commented on it all the time. Maybe they're hoping that Sheila Simon can do the same thing, keep those voters' enthusiasm without you know, changing her positions and going right, because obviously downstate is a lot more conservative.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you buy Governor Pat Quinn has said that, no, it's not her name. It's not that she's the daughter of Paul Simon, that she was chosen. He
Amanda, there is no Santa Claus, and it is her name. That has a lot, yeah, obviously.
Not teaching law at Southern Illinois.
She's qualified. I mean, I think she's qualified.
Right.
Is she qualified?
Clearly,
enough?
Clearly she's very smart. You know, she has background as a assistant state's attorney, and she's served on boards and commissions and those kinds of things. So, yeah, she has some qualifications. I think, you know, her name comes in if you compare her to somebody like Art Turner, the other choice, who has 30 years in the General Assembly, or even Susan Garrett, who is said to be Quinn's pick at one time, who has time in the General Assembly. You know, she doesn't have that kind of elected experience. She has one term on the Carbondale City Council, for example, before she lost for mayor. So, I mean, she's an intelligent woman. She has experience doing things. She doesn't have that long political resume that some of the other candidates did.
Which can be good and bad. I mean, depending on your perspective. It's not as if the General Assembly is well loved these days.
Well, she doesn't have a voting record for anybody to
Right.
delve into and hit her over the head with like the rest of them do. So.
That said, I know I spoke with representatives from the Green Party, and they said, you know, Pat Quinn has clearly had problems working with the General Assembly. And again, that's debatable. He's clearly gotten through this pension plan, the two-tiered system, and a capital plan, but in general, hasn't necessarily had a reputation for running a smooth operation. And that having somebody who really knows the legislature is something that would be very handy. Also, I know they had said, you know, this shows that he's taking black voters for granted. Reaction to either of those, or those?
He is taking black voters for granted. There's a little question about that. I think the mindset is, where are they going to go? Are they going to go to the Republicans? Probably not. Now, of course, that can backfire. They can stay home. I don't know if there's enough anger. I know Representative Turner was working pretty hard after the vote that Saturday to come out and say, look, we're all one party now, and don't be angry about this. But that doesn't mean all of his supporters are going to adhere to that.
And maybe, who knows, maybe the African American lawmakers will ask for something down the road in budget talks or something else. You really hurt us with this. Maybe here's a different way to make it up to us. We don't have any idea what that might be, but something might come up. Surely they have to be hurted by this because he came in second and everything. But maybe Quinn will find some way to make it up to him.
Even talk about him getting a job, a high-level position, I believe, with the Quinn administration.
If that would not surprise anybody if that happened at this point. Yeah.
Is it surprising at all that right now on the ballot there isn't a Latino candidate? Is that surprising that that demographic, which has a fairly loud and strong political voice, at least in the General Assembly, that there wasn't really a push made in that regard?
Though there is on the Republican side, I believe, and they made a big deal out of that.
Right.
Robert Enriquez, and maybe.
I mean, for Democrats who,
Right, yeah. I mean, Republicans made a big deal. We're trying to recruit a diverse ticket. Yeah, maybe it is a mistake for Democrats not to at least acknowledge that Latinos are a big population in Illinois.
So something Mike brought up a minute ago, wondering what Sheila Simon's role will be. Obviously, it isn't just that Simon was a popular politician, that Paul Simon was a popular politician, but also that his thing was ethics. His thing was, pure as the driven snow politics, and that's something that Quinn is trying to, an issue that he's trying to make his own in the wake of Rod Blagojevich. It wouldn't surprise me a bit if he made her ethics czar or something. I mean, I bet you'll see something like that where they're really focused on that, even in the campaign before they, even before they take office, where they'll win.
Kind of giving a role to Lieutenant Governor, because that's something that's interesting. Actually, in the budget that Quinn has put forth as his proposed budget, there's no money given to that office, and they say no big deal, we'll fill it once the position is filled. But that said, this is a position that has gone unfilled for about a year since Quinn moved up and was elevated to the governor's office. So as we talk about all of this, does it really matter? No. Either Sheila Simon, the candidate, are people going to care about who's lieutenant governor? Are people going to care later on once whoever wins this race? Does lieutenant governor matter? We even have a proposal to eliminate the office entirely.
Just going to say, there's some legislation that thinks it doesn't matter. Yeah, that's a fair question.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same way in national elections. People talk about, does the vice presidential pick really matter? There's so much made up of it, before the president picks a running mate, or the candidate anyway, picks a running mate. And at the end of the day, is anybody thinking, about the number 2 when they go into the polls? Maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, it's been said that the most important thing that a candidate for the second spot can do is not hurt you. And I think Quinn did okay on that front. I don't think she's going to embarrass him in any way. But I mean, Mike's right. In the end, it's going to be about Quinn.
At least if he didn't burn too many bridges, either in ignoring constituencies or, again, you mentioned Senator Susan Garrett, and there had been other names thrown out in saying, this is who I want, and then yes, no, and that could be embarrassing, some might say, for a politician to kind of feel discarded and thrown out.
I think he'll get past the African American thing. I think he will. There's some hurt feelings there, but it's not as if the Democratic Party isn't diverse. Of course it is. So they don't have anything to prove on that front, I think.
Okay. Moving on now to another issue. Illinois got some news this week that it lost its bid for $500 million in federal education funds. Some might say that Illinois didn't finish in its race to the top. So that's the federal program that is supposed to award money for innovation in schools, and especially kind of targeting lower performing districts and students and helping them through these special tiers. Why don't we talk about that? What was this money supposed to have gone to, and what does it mean that Illinois was not one of the only two winners?
Yeah, well, first it means that there's still another round that they could win a bunch of this money. And it's supposed to go to, in their application, they laid out a bunch of education reforms that they would pay for with this money should they win. I think it's important to note, Illinois has this huge budget hole. The governor is talking about raising income taxes to pay for education, stop layoffs. Race to the top wouldn't have prevented any of that from happening. You can only use that money to pay for these reforms you've applied for. So,
and what kind of reforms, before you go on, any examples?
Yeah, I'm not an education expert, but I mean, it wouldn't have saved any teachers' jobs.
Right, it was things like raising the cap on charter schools and
Sure,
teacher
yeah.
evaluations and tying teachers' performance to students' performance, things along those lines. Or there's also longitudinal data and measuring how students did from the time that they were in preschool throughout their whole academic career. So those sort of reforms that maybe that the State Board of Education says are important and will continue nonetheless, but that one might argue wouldn't be readily apparent to parents and communities worried about teachers and larger classroom sizes.
Yeah, educators would argue that this will help the educational experience a lot. This will help your students, but it wouldn't have. I think the thing that people are most worried about right now, it wouldn't have dealt with any of that.
And you said that Illinois does still have a chance to apply for more money. I believe that Superintendent of State Schools, Chris Cook, had said part of what Illinois' downfall in its application was that not every district had signed on. Granted, that's a tough task in Illinois because we have so many units of local government, and I think something like almost 900 school districts in this state. So getting some of the smaller ones to sign on to these reforms at a time when they say we don't have any money. Is that going to be a feasibility, do you think, or any predictions on what Illinois needs to do to achieve in this next round? We came in 5th this time, and there's supposed to be about 10 or 15 awarded in the next round. So theoretically, that might give the state a chance.
Logically, you would think, maybe Illinois would win the next one. A lot of the local school districts didn't sign on because they were saying this will be a big burden to us at a time when we're having a hard enough time with everything else. So, I mean, maybe some more will sign on, maybe they don't. But, I mean, I'd say, I think it's a safe enough bet that with a top-ish finish the first round that maybe they would get money in the second or
Quinn
third
definitely
round.
needs some good news regarding schools at this point.
That he does. I've noticed this week he's been kind of getting back out and making a lot of appearances, things like construction at Western Illinois University, a new office, it's the governor's office of New Americans, and kind of, it seems getting back into, I'm the governor.
It's one of the advantages when you're an incumbent, as he is running for office. Obviously, you get to go to these official duties, or you don't call them campaign stops, but obviously they're going to get covered in the media, and you look gubernatorial, and you look like a statesman in all of this. And so, he's going to take full advantage of that. And I think you would argue that he wouldn't be a very competent politician if he didn't.
Yeah, because what have we heard from Senator Brady, his GOP nominee of late?
A little
I was
harder
about
to
to
get
say
attention.
the same thing. Yeah, I mean, nothing hardly. Yeah, except for responding to some of Quinn's decisions and things. But he hasn't had the same travel schedule at all.
And Jason Plummer as well, his lieutenant governor candidate. Getting back to the beginning, Sheila Simon, I think he said, this just shows the Democratic Party, again, kind of taking the Green Party line. They're taking black voters for granted. They aren't respecting voters. But that's about all we've really heard from him.
And they're going to try to drive a wedge there, obviously. I mean, the Republican Party probably wants to be careful about going too far out on the issue of wooing black voters, given the demographics of their own party. But yeah, they'd be crazy not to try and take advantage of that. Again, I'm not convinced it's going to work, but you'll see it for a while.
Now, the Quinn administration is trying to do something new, it seems. The legislature last year, as part of it, the major construction plan, said, let's outsource the state lottery. A bit different than the plan under the Blagojevich administration that his finance director, John Filan, had proposed in terms of selling or leasing the state lottery. This time they want to outsource it and have a private manager run it. Mike, what happened with that? And it seems as if Illinois is actually taking some steps to make this happen.
Yeah, Illinois, they have to. I mean, the legislature said you need to do this. They basically hired consultants or a firm to help them hire the eventual manager of the lottery. And like you said, it's different from that plan that Illinois proposed. A lot of different states, Indiana included, others, will sell the lottery, get a big chunk of money up front, and or lease the lottery. Now, this private manager would help run the lottery, and the theory would be that they'll create efficiencies and things like that that'll drive profits up and get the state more money. Among those, if the federal government says it's okay, is to sell lottery tickets on the internet, which is, doesn't cost you a lot of money to sell. There's no overhead. You don't have to pay for retailers, any of that. You just sell them online. But since the federal government came down and shut down online poker and all that stuff, they have to get this internet thing signed off on before they can go forward.
I know when I spoke with the acting superintendent of the state lottery, Joni Winnett, she said, but we want to make sure it's continue to be run in a socially responsible way. Mm-hmm. Is that socially responsible, or is that, I know, is there a criticism to be had to say that, well, if a private company is going to come in here, don't they want to get something out of it?
Yeah, I mean, they would, in theory, if they raised profits, they would share in those profits some percentage. Yeah, I mean, anti-gambling advocates would say that, selling tickets on the internet is,
they're very opposed to that.
Right, you can sit at home and just, gamble all the time. I mean, yeah, that might drive your profits up, but people who are opposed to gambling would obviously have concerns with that.
Right, and so basically outsourcing. But why can't Illinois do that? Why do we need a private manager and pay them and give up some of the profits?
Well, as Mike just mentioned, they need to hire somebody to work on hiring somebody. That's state government for you, so maybe they, I mean, it's a good question, too. Why couldn't we just do that? I think probably the thought is that they want to sweeten the pot a little bit for these private companies because, as you mentioned, they'll have to get something out of it. They'll have to work for some, I don't know whether it's a percentage or a fee or what. But,
yeah.
But you would obviously have to, if the whole idea is to get more out of the lottery, but you're having to give some of that money to a private contractor, you need to up what you're bringing in, and that would be one way of doing it.
Any other, downfalls, benefits, or particularities of this issue? Because this would be fairly innovative, right?
Yeah. I mean, all the state lotteries are run fairly differently. Some of them are even, I'm not a lawyer, but they're not even part of state government. They control their own staffs, but state government controls them somehow. I mean, this would be pretty innovative to have a third-party manager come in, but it totally takes off the table the idea of leasing the lottery to a private company.
So that's one of the revenue ideas. The legislature is on break in the midst of a 2-week break. We're in and out week 1. So another week where they won't be passing any legislation, but then they'll be coming back and actually supposed to adjourn May 7th. So a fairly early adjournment date. What has to get done when they come back? We're talking about revenue and leasing or selling the state lottery off the table and this outsourcing. Who knows how much that'll bring in? What has to be done in that regard? Where is it? The tax plan that Quinn has proposed?
All they have to do is fix a $13 billion budget hole in the middle of an election year. It's easy. Yeah. No, it's going to be all budget all the time, and the governor has his rather controversial budget on the table in which he basically is saying, look, give me this tax increase or I'm going to cut schools to the bone, and they may get down into a sort of game of chicken like they did last time he did this with the college students, and he backed off, and I'm sure there's probably some people who think he's going to do that again. But, ultimately what happened last time, the brief way of putting it is that they sort of just tossed it in his lap. They passed a sort of budget and gave him the authority to do whatever he wanted in terms of the actual where the money goes. And it wouldn't surprise me if they ended up doing that again, just to get it off their laps during an election year. Nobody wants to do what you have to do to fix this thing in an election year because you're either going to cut so deeply that everyone's going to feel it, or else you're going to have to raise taxes.
Will that method of hurrying and finishing by May 7th, is that helpful in an election year so that you can then start campaigning and not have constant headlines about the deficit? Or will that be harmful to say they all left town and who cares? We've got this massive problem with they didn't deal with. Elect me to come back, please.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that I think they'll probably end up punting on this. I mean, the difference between finishing at the beginning of May or the end of May might not make a huge difference in how much you end up campaigning. But I think either time, the headlines are going to be there. And, even after, say, they're not working on it, but they've punted, the headlines about various healthcare providers and other people who aren't getting paid and will be there no matter if they punt. I mean, if they don't do anything, those headlines will be there whether they're in Springfield working on it or not, or if they're back home campaigning.
And the headlines may be worse if they do
Yeah.
that, because it's going to be, look at these problems and they didn't even fix them, they just left.
Any thoughts on what has been done with the budget in terms of, again, this pension stabilization plan that creates lower benefit systems for incoming state workers as of next year? What that means, Illinois has received a downgrade from Fitch.
It was going to be worse, the downgrade, is basically what it comes down to. If they hadn't done something to brighten the future of the pension system, they were looking at something, frankly, sort of catastrophic when it came to the rating. But I think you should look at this as an indication of just how serious a problem this is, because when even a democratically controlled legislature, which is like this with the unions, does something that the unions so vehemently oppose because they have no choice, that kind of shows you how bad things are.
Is it show that this pension plan has worked then? I mean, a week in that we're already seeing, you said it would have been worse, or does it say that Illinois maybe didn't go far enough in that?
A lot of people think we didn't go far enough. A lot of people think a lot of the editorial writers are saying, you shouldn't have just, basically what they did was to say, okay, all future employees, public employees hired from here on out, you get less of a deal than the ones who are on the payroll now. Well, there's some who said you should change the deal for the people on the payroll now. Let them keep what they have already vested, but cut it off, like this is happening to a lot of us in the private industry. They didn't go quite that far, and that would have probably been a lot better in terms of the future, but they already know that by what they've done, they're going to save billions of dollars, over the long haul. I mean, there's no way not to when you've cut off benefits like that.
So given that passed, what else do you see Major both say they'll punt? Is there anything going to happen with the budget? Any sort of increase, any sort of major cut? This was kind of the big thing. Yeah. And like I said,
this and the tax hike, which I don't think is going to happen in an election year.
And this big thing doesn't save you all that much money this year. Right. I mean, we're talking a lot about long-term savings. No future, just by definition, no future employees have been hired yet, so you haven't saved any money on them.
Right. There's not supposed to be many hired, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We don't have much of a budget.
Yeah, no, this is hiring. This is looking down the road. But yeah, in terms of money in your pocket now, this doesn't help much at all. Again, they either need very, very deep cuts. Some would say there's no way to cut enough to fix this, or a tax hike, and either of those are going to be real hard to do in an election year.
And how will this pension thing even play with voters? Do voters care about pensions? Is that something that's grabbing?
Perhaps it'll play with the public union voters, of whom there are a lot, but I mean they're not a majority of the electorate by any means. So I mean it takes, I think, Republicans who have been calling for pension reform, that's one thing that they have a little less leg to stand on when they campaign.
It gives some of the Democrats, it nullifies this criticism that they're ignoring this huge problem. They go, no, we're not ignoring it. Look what we did.
And it's not like you said, a lot of people will say maybe you didn't go far enough, but in the end, a lot of Republicans voted for the plan that went through last week.
Another initiative that's gotten some attention this year, there are so many big ones and it's hard to choose, but has been redistricting, because as y'all know, you're supposed to be filling out your census information, and when that's done, that information comes back and Illinois' legislative districts are redrawn. And deadline's kind of coming up for that, and that signatures for a citizens initiative have to be turned into the State Board of Elections by May. And this Fair Map Coalition that's basically League of Women Voters, Republicans have signed on, trying to collect signatures, have pushed back the deadline of April 1st to turn those in to April 16th. They say, we don't know how many signatures we have. It's not that there's a problem, it's just that this is a busy time of year. Do you think that there is any chance that this citizens initiative is going to get on the ballot that will change how Illinois draws its legislative districts? And if not, could a constitutional amendment pass through the legislature, as Republicans say they're going to try and do, and Democrats have said, we want one too? Any chance?
There's probably a chance. I mean, it's hard to say
How big?
without collecting those signatures. But yeah, I mean, if they feel like they needed extra time, there probably is at least less confidence there. There's been a lot of talk about passing one through the General Assembly, but there's been no actual voting or anything like that.
Well, and the paradox with changing the map, when you're talking about the district maps, is that the party that's in power is the party that's going to not want that to happen, because they want things the way they are, and so.
So do you believe Democrats that have said, they had a big press conference and Senate Democrats said, we have a plan, it's not in legislative form yet, but we have something that we want to do.
That sounds better than saying we like the current gerrymandering. So that's why they're saying that, but they like the current gerrymandering.
So you're not buying it, huh?
No, not even a little.
Okay. In also constitutional amendments, again, there is the one that would eliminate the lieutenant governor's office, another one regarding judges. We're about to finish out this program. Any thoughts on, Republicans say Democrats are trying to crowd out the ballot? Is that what this looks like? Or are these earnest reforms that Democrats, and in particular Speaker of the House Mike Madigan, truly and earnestly wants?
It's a strangely nefarious theory. I mean, and you can only have, three?
You can amend 3 articles.
3 articles
or
per election, and so all of a sudden they're piling things on to, allegedly, to prevent these other amendments that they don't want. I don't know. I mean, you'd really have to be pretty nefarious to sit around and think something like that up, but who knows.
Plus, that assumes the idea of crowding out this fair map one assumes that you would believe the fair map one would make it out of the legislature.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been any voting on that, so.
There's easier ways to stop this stuff than to crowd up the ballot.
Yeah,
So.
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and it's just interesting that after a call for a constitutional convention last year didn't pass, there is at least some action. Hasn't really gone through except for the recall of governors, the only one that as of now is on the ballot. The rest, it's all just talk. There's a whole lot of that in the General Assembly. Again, not this week, but here on Capitol View. I hope that we had some interesting and informative talk for you. Thank you so much, Kevin McDermott of the
Amanda.
St. Louis Post-Dispatch, for joining us this week, and Mike Riopell of the newspaper group, Bloomington Panagraph. Gosh, all over the place. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Capitol View.